Welcome to The Visible Artist. My name is Sophie Loxton-Lucas, and this week I headed to All Star Press, a 3-in-1 art gallery, design company and print studio in Logan Square, Chicago, to chat to founder Zissou Tasseff-Elenkoff. Originally hailing from England, Zissou graduated from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and began his journey of creating and selling prints across the world. Over the past 15 years, he has built his screen print business, curated exhibitions, and brought together illustrators, artists, street art, sports fans, and designers to create a unique, all-inclusive atmosphere like no other in the city. All Star Press provides opportunities for hundreds of talented artists, both local and international, through the gallery's own exhibition programming and high-profile brand commissions. I was really intrigued to hear more about Zissou's approach to working with artists, how he discovers new talent, what he looks for in an artist for different collaborations, and how he has created his own unique market position in the contemporary art world. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi, Zissou. Thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. You're more than welcome.
So we're sitting here in the All Star Press print studio and gallery space in Chicago, which is great to be here. Let's start with you and your background, as you're an artist yourself, aren't you? As well as the gallery founder and director.
Sure. I started off as a printer for the most part. Came to Chicago to print and then started teaching it in 2007, kind of here and there. Built a studio at the same time, and then, kind of things have just trickled since then. And here we are, I don't know, almost 15 years later.
Mm. And how would you describe All Star Press now?
All Star is kind of a little bit of a combination, I guess, of All Star Press and Fug Screens. Fug Screens has been kind of the constant throughout my career, and that's kind of the backbone of the business. So that's mainly the print studio, and then All Star is our retail gallery space, which is kind of the front for the whole thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So on a social level and on a public level, we push, All Star Press as the brand, but the workings of it are kind of still the Fug Screen side of things.
So we're in the home of both of those.
Yes.
And at the moment we're in more of the behind the scenes.
More of the Fug Screen side. Yeah, this is the basement.
It's
Fug
great.
Screen's basement.
There's a lot to look at in this space. I can see like shelves and shelves of your prints and all sorts of other, and some screens and lots of drawers. lots of little
tokens. I'm a big collector myself. I kind of grew up around lots of visually stimulating objects. It's definitely still very much part of my life. A little story behind lots of little, random things that are placed around the studio, and same thing in my house.
Have you always been in this space?
No. So we've been in this space for 5 years as of February this year. Prior to that, my gallery retail was separate from my print studio. So the old Fug Screens used to be on Ashland and North in Bucktown, Wicker Park area. And then my retail at the time from 2012 to 2016 was Gallery F, which I opened in 2012. So now it's all together.
I see, yes.
And that's since 2017.
You've really built up quite an impressive arts creative space here. Did you have that in mind when you started?
No, probably not. No, I don't think so. My first commercial space on Ashland was too big for me to rent by myself at the time. So I had to have other people there. And inherently I enjoy being around other people. I like my alone time for sure, but I thrive with, being able to discuss things and kind of chat and have people around. So the social aspect of what we do is pretty important. So over the years, it's become more and more of a thing. And I think there's a pretty evident transition from the emphasis just being me and my gig poster career to me facilitating lots of random things.
When you say gig poster career, what do you mean?
When I initially became self-employed, I was just teaching for the most part and doing kind of random little bits and pieces for friends or friends of friends, whether it was small shirt runs or poster runs. So that's where I kind of started designing gig posters for local shows, as any kind of gig poster person does. And that grew into me doing flat stocks and poster fairs all around the world. And through that, I met, dozens, if not hundreds of other gig poster artists from all over the world. And because I grew up in Europe, I have a kind of a connection to there just intrinsically. And so I built kind of a nice community of friends and co-workers in the gig poster industry. And I did that for about 10 years and have worked for lots of amazing bands and clients over the years through that specifically. And that was kind of always the backbone of the studio, was more music in the music industry than anything else.
And that was your own work, your own designs?
Yeah, that was all me. But at the same time, we were printing stuff for all kinds of other people.
Yeah.
So the production aspect, like there's lots of gig poster people out there who just print their own stuff and that's it. But we were a production studio as well. So if anybody needed anything printed locally or wherever else, then we could take that on. And over the years, that's become much more, our business than just me making gig posters.
So what was the next step after that?
So me doing posters turned into like me doing posters and also renting studio space. And that was where I met my ex-business partner. We opened Gallery F. And so that was the kind of the transition. Like I've only kind of got out of gig posters in the last 3 years. Prior to that, I was still actively doing them, as well as All Star, as well as all the other stuff. Mm-hmm. So the Gallery F thing kind of changed things in terms of like my connection to Chicago in like a physical space, because we had a retail space and we were really the only space in the city at the time that was doing like street art and gig posters that you could walk in and just buy.
Yeah.
And it was affordable for the most part. It was accessible, which was kind of our goal. We were open 6 days a week, which no other gallery, usually is. We had all of those things going for us. And it was, we were also on the Strip. We were on Milwaukee, right next to Revolution and Kohl's and a bunch of local businesses that made that whole Logan Square thing kind of hit. We were just there at the right time, right place, doing the right thing.
I always think that when people say right time, right place, it's kind of frustrating because people might be listening and think, I'd like to do that, but am I not in the right time, the right place? But I imagine you were also doing the right things, as you say. But making it happen. I
mean, the right time, right place can be any time, right? It's just who it is, what it is, where it is. Mm-hmm. So I think for us, it was the right time, right place, because we got in on that Strip before Emporium came along, right? And so before the distillery came along. So we were kind of there 2 years before all the big boys came in and kind of made it that Strip. But we were also having, not like sales-wise, but we were having shows where we'd have 300 to 500 people show up.
Yes, yeah. I was about to say. In one
evening. Like, it was insane.
Yeah, so did you feel as though you really tapped into an audience that wasn't being served by other galleries?
Yeah, 100%. There was nobody else doing it. And then you got Vertical came along and Trueborn came along. And now, 10 years later, there's probably at least 24 spaces that kind of do what we did. Anyway, so when I left there, I kind of had to kind of restructure and rethink what I was doing, because there was already those spaces around. If I was opening the same thing again, then I'd be doing, just following the same kind of footsteps, which to me is not redundant, but I like moving forwards.
So how did you do that? What did you do that was different?
Sports.
And what do you mean by that?
In the same kind of way where there wasn't a gig poster gallery and there wasn't a street art gallery, there wasn't a sports gallery. And unlike a lot of creative people, I'm a giant sports fan. So for me, like, not only am I a fan, but like I'm a history like fan. Like I like the statistics side of sports. And so I grew up in England for the most part watching, not even watching football, because it was never on TV because it was bought by Sky. So as a kid, we couldn't even watch like football. You could only listen to it on the radio unless you had Sky. But every year, me and my dad would come to Pennsylvania to visit my family because I'm half American. And my grandfather would take us all once a year to see the Phillies. So I grew up a giant Philadelphia fan. I like the Eagles and the Sixers and the Phillies and the Flyers. And so in the mid-90s, Channel 5 got a contract for Major League Baseball. And it like changed my life. So it was on the weekends, I think, and on Wednesdays. And it was live. So it was it started at 11:30 and it ended at like 2 a.m. But on school nights, I used to watch it pretty regularly.
You have the passion for sport, but you were also an artist.
Music, sports, and art are like my main, and video games, actually. Yeah, and computer games.
Well,
4.
I probably fit into more of the stereotype in that I work in the art world and love fine art, but I don't know much about sports. But when I think about the UK sports scene and then the US sports scene in the US, they seem to have a lot more mascots, visuals. There's just a lot more visual material there that you could use. And I guess, is that what you tapped into here?
Yes and no. I think it was more of just the fact that, like, you know, if you think of sports art for the most part, it's pretty corny.
Yeah.
It's
yes.
pretty
That's
tacky,
what I think.
right?
Yes.
So I was fully aware of that. But with the experience I had, and also the fact that, like, I understand sports culture, or I think I do. And then I also understand the art culture and lots of little things in between, whether it's music, whether it's, you know, fashion. Like, my dad was in jewelry fashion for 35 years or so. And so there's like lots of little crossovers that kind of blend all of those realities a little bit and markets. And I feel like I have a decent grasp of like what people enjoy. Might be a little bit different as well than like the same usually get. I wanted to see if I could do that differently and create a market.
So could you give me an example of how you did that successfully? Combining the art and the sport.
I took the leap. How about that? Had the faith in myself to have enough of a passion for sports and the art side of things and know enough people and have the drive and all of those things to say, yes, I think this could be a reality, that I can make it work. And it was really difficult. And it's only kind of just in the last 2 years, to be honest, kind of turned the corner a little bit.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, just from kind of where I started off when we first opened All Star, you know, I was in the hole. I had to kind of rebuild lots of little things, rebuild. And all of that stuff is pretty difficult. And it takes time and a lot of effort and predominantly a lot of belief.
It's a strong idea that you had and a gap that you saw in the market. So how did it work with the artists? Did you already have the relationship with those artists, and how did you introduce them to creating this sort of work?
The artist relationship has been there for a while, right? And my connections to like lots of different markets has been there. So I got lucky, and a friend of mine knew somebody in the Bulls organization, and they put me forwards for not an interview, but like, you know, go meet their creative director. And that totally changed everything. He's been like a huge catalyst for us as a brand kind of being able to navigate in that space. We got lucky, but part of that luck was just me kind of I just keep pushing. I always just push.
So what was the result of that meeting? Did he commission prints from you?
We started the poster series for the Bulls.
Okay.
So that's kind of where it kicked off. And then from there we did a hat series, which they had already done 1 year, but it was all internalized. And instead I was curating, I was picking the artists and helping with the designs and helping kind of just logistically make it all happen. So that was all the beginning of it. And then from there we got connected to the Blackhawks. And from there, we got connected to the White Sox, and then to the Bears, and to the Cubs.
And what sort of artists were you working with?
Well, that's the fun bit, is like anybody.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
That's like the great thing about it, because sure, it's sports, right? But you could put a spin on anything and turn it into something that's still interesting, and using different aesthetics and different, mindsets and things that appeal to different people. And because these teams are predominantly looking for that, for that cultural connection to their fan base and to grow their fan base, then it makes sense for everybody.
Yes, when I think about all the artists that you have listed on your website, I've had a look at them and I'm familiar with some of them from seeing them out in the city. They are quite varied.
Yeah,
it must be
eclectic.
fun looking for them. How do you find those artists? Do you approach
It's through
them?
just what I've been doing for the last 15 years. I've worked with all of them in some aspect before, whether I've printed their work, whether I've asked them to help me with something, or they've done a project with me, or they've painted a wall, or they've, I met somebody at Flatstock in Austin or in Barcelona, or, whatever. It's just like little connections, that you make. And over the years, you have more and more of those little connections as long as you stay active. Those things have just grown and grown. Now, over the last decade or so, we've worked with probably thousands of artists and dozens of brands.
When I think about some of the artists, there's often they are artists that work outside, they do large-scale murals. Would you say that you work only with street artists, or you don't see it in that way?
No, not at all. It's so dependent on the project. We also run all of our internal printing as well, and kind of our releases through All Star, and all of that is obviously curated by me. But for like the poster stuff, for instance, I have to be cognizant of the process. If we're doing a poster series for the Bears, it needs to be something that's accessible to their fan base and accessible to the organization and makes sense for the artists. Each curation job is kind of a fun little puzzle, sometimes a really annoying puzzle too, but that's what kind of keeps it interesting for me. And that's what's always been my emphasis, to like work with others, is the eclectic nature of like one project to the other. It can be night and day.
So when you're creating a poster series, how much do you steer the artist or brief them? How much do you choose them based on their original work and you just let them run with it?
Sure.
So how's that relationship work?
It depends on the person, I think. And also on like the third party. Some brands are very open to interpretation, and some brands are absolutely not. They want what they want when they want it, so it's so kind of specific to the project. But mainly I try and spread the love a little bit, where like I'm not just using the same people all the time, because that gets boring for me, I guess, and it also gets boring for our fan base. And and there's just so much talent out there that it's kind of endless, somewhat overwhelming to an extent, actually.
In what way do you find it overwhelming? Just there's so many artists out there that you can work with. Yeah. And
that didn't used to be the case. Like when I started doing gig posters, there was like, I don't know, 50 really good ones. Now there's probably, I don't know, 400 or 500 really good ones who are all somewhat established. Instagram and social media has just changed all of that so drastically, so quickly, that it's overwhelming. It's hard to kind of discern sometimes what's of, how do I put it? What's of, not what's quality, because that's so, specific and particular, but like where to go with it, because there's just so much available.
Yes.
There's never been anything like it really in the art scene, because it's become commercialized. It's become corporate. Didn't used to be corporate.
Yes, there's definitely a whole new element that's been driven by social media and corporate companies interested in working with artists, that brings in this whole new dynamic that's still being navigated really by both artists and gallerists and anyone that's working in that field.
It's a strange balance, because it's obviously there's hundreds of artists out there who are getting paid to do great projects in theory. But then it also does, it can slightly diminish the importance of art to an extent. But I don't know, you can look at it so many different ways. Definitely.
And I think people even kind of almost, I don't know, sort of started to realize that a bit now as well. So it's not just about followers, but it's about the quality of the work and the artist and the story and
the integrity or whatever that means.
So if you come across an artist that you really like, and you've never worked with them, you don't have any links with them, like how would you approach them and start that conversation?
Usually through an email. I like to keep it somewhat formal. I'm almost 40. I'm a year away from 40. So I'm past my prime for sure in terms of like my communications and my like tech levels.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So I don't really like doing business through DMs. I find it hard to track, for instance, and it's just like it's too loose.
Yeah.
So I like to kind of try and set some precedent and do emails.
Yeah.
That was a long-winded answer. Sorry.
No, I was just thinking about you saying that because I think before you mentioned that it's about relationships and getting to know people, but there's always that line, isn't there, between keeping it professional as well.
Yeah, there has to be a business aspect to it because otherwise things can get messy quick as well. And we have so much going on. We're a small business, but there's a lot going out the door, whether it's printing wise or just all of it. And so to be able to manage it all, to be able to, rein it in somewhere, that helps. Otherwise it becomes unmanageable.
And lots of your artists must know each other now.
Yes.
It's quite a community just around what you're doing.
Yeah, and that's inherently like, I don't know, I feel like that's the point. Otherwise what's the point? I don't know. If it's for one person, sure, that one person can enjoy it, but if it's for, 10 or 100 or whatever, then it makes more sense, I think.
And you have your gallery space here. And can you tell me about some of the shows that you might do there or how that works? Again,
like within the last 3 years, I've the business model's changed quite a bit. So it used to be we'd put on gallery shows every month and sometimes more. 8 years ago or so, 6 years ago, we were doing like anywhere from 15 to like 17 shows a year.
Wow. Yeah. That's a lot.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
So I stopped doing that because it was crazy. So in 2020, I actually came into 2020 not knowing what was obviously going to happen.
Yes.
But I came into that year only having booked 4 shows. I was going to do one every quarter, and that was going to be the new All-Star. So it worked out perfectly, kind of, because we went to just like producing our own internal prints and curating that print series and doing a show based off of that at the end of the year, and then just doing less is more theory and work kind of smarter, not harder. That doesn't always play out, but but that was the idea. So we've had all kinds of shows over the years, from like Secret Walls shows to giant You Are Beautiful shows to obviously JC and Scent Rock, and we did our, Lefty Out There's first show, Kate Lewis's first show. And it's all, all of it is kind of so cyclical, which is what kind of makes it fun. Like Griffin initially was interning for me, and like his first 2 weeks of interning, like right out of school, was helping me and Skewville from Brooklyn build a Pizza Hut, basically like a 20 by 30 pizza store for ComplexCon.
Okay.
In my alley, in my garage. And it was like 95 degrees outside. And it was horrific. Like it was one of the most stressful weeks of my life.
Oh no.
But the booth looked unbelievable. Like it was probably one of the most fun things I've also done. And now Griffin, has like broken into the art scene, and his work is amazing, and he's doing a solo show with us. So it's kind of like, that was 4 years ago, and it kind of came all the way back around. And there's so many instances of that over the years that's where the fun stuff happens.
Yes. Yeah. And these artists now, I imagine you're building up a database of collectors that are interested in following their career and collecting from them. Absolutely,
yeah. That's always ongoing. You meet new people, you show in new spaces, and you broaden that scope on a day-to-day basis, hopefully, if you're doing things right. And that's also a big kind of push of like why I keep it eclectic, is because I'm reaching lots of different people.
Yes,
on a regular basis. Like we reach the sports crowd, but then we reach some fine art stuff. Like, we do work for Louis Buell and Pose and Revoke and all those people as well. And then we do stuff for the Bulls, or we do stuff for a local pizza shop or whatever. It's just it's so random, but it keeps it interesting.
Yes, and I suppose if you have that more flexible approach, versatile approach, you can you can just sort of take the projects you want to do.
In theory, yeah. That was always the goal. Back in the day, it was just take everything that comes in, no matter what. Just get it done. Figure out a way to get it done because it's going to pay the bills. But now the emphasis is I don't want to take everything on because I don't enjoy doing all of the things that come in. So I want to curate that aspect and, in theory, create our own production, our own industry, which we've done to an extent, and it's, I'd say, somewhat successful. There's always things that can be better.
I suppose I was thinking about the contemporary art world, and often it seems as though galleries are really restricted in that if they do something that's not in the exact direction they're meant to be going, it can really damage their reputation. It just seems really tricky to navigate, whereas if you're a bit more free and if you want to do a fun project on the side, then it's not going to be a problem for the other projects you're doing. Just do what you want to do, really.
I think there is definitely always a push and pull as to what to put out there, because there's a ton of stuff that we do that never sees the light of day. Nobody ever knows that we've done that.
What
just mainly print production. But there's lots of little in between things, like I got this person a gig or whatever. It's so random, but there's lots of things that we don't push in terms of we did this.
You are careful with selective
content.
And what you're telling.
I think you have to be. You can't just shove everything out there because that nobody wants that.
So where would you see yourself in more of the art world, contemporary art?
And I think that's the tricky bit. I run a business that isn't pigeonholed, which can be a great thing, and then it can be a curse as well. So it has been with All Star, it's been finding that balance of can we push a Bulls hat and then turn around and push a Jason Revoke piece? Does that make sense for us? Not sure it does, but we do it.
Especially if you're bringing in a new audience and you're kind of educating them about print and why the prices might be higher than they'd expect, and they're not posters, they're limited edition prints, and that must be hard if you're then trying to sell a cap.
Exactly. It works for the most part, but there's definitely aspects that don't, and so I think as with any business, it's tweaking those little aspects for it to work better and for your audience to understand what you do. But that's part of the fun of it to an extent is figuring all that stuff out. It's also stressful, but without it, it's kind of I guess it'd be too easy, right?
Going back to what I said before, I'm talking to some gallerists, it just seems like there's more of a obvious route that they're going and trying to do certain fairs and do certain shows, but you can make your own journey a bit more. I think
that's it's a reflection of me. Because I grew up in the art world in terms of my mother is an art nut. She's just anything creative, anything visual, just anything. She just loves learning and seeing new things and being exposed to new things. And so I have that aspect, but then I also have the aspect that I don't really like shishi galleries. I've never liked them. And so I that's never what I set out to be. I kind of had an in-joke that I'd buy the White Cube Gallery one day in London, but that's the opposite of what I would want to be. I kind of don't like that traditional sterile space. What we've done over the years with whether it's Gallery F or whether it's All Star Press or Folk Screens, it's always been slightly, I'm going to do it whether or not you like it.
Yes.
Kind of thing. And that's kind of who I am. I'm going to push my emphasis because why wouldn't I?
Well, it's obviously working well for you.
It can. it can be a little, it can be tricky at times, but yeah.
So I was interviewing Scent Rock in his studio space because you've obviously worked very closely with him and come across him and his work through All Star Press. And he was showing me some of the prints that you produced for him for a recent show that he's done.
Very cool, yeah.
He was showing me how you've printed them to almost look like the sketchbook, and there's got a torn side.
Yeah.
And I loved that approach. And then I suppose it occurred to me that it's really unusual the situation you're in when you're like a print studio and a gallery, because you're so part of the production side, working with the artist to actually make the art and shape the art.
Sure.
As well as then showing it. And that not many people are in that position.
No, and that's definitely what sets us apart, is the fact that I am a working artist. I do less and less of my own stuff over the years, but I still do my own stuff. And I understand what it takes to like be an individual artist as well as a business owner or a gallerist or a curator or whatever else. But a lot of gallerists and business people don't understand the inner workings of like making something. That's a big disconnect, or it can be, right? Now, obviously, there's plenty of really successful galleries out there, and it doesn't matter that that's the case, because the business of selling art can be devoid of the production aspect, right? But for me, it's kind of integral. It's kind of back to like my mother, understanding of how something is made and the enjoyment of that, the enjoyment of the process and fabrication of something, I think is really interesting. Things moving and being made. Yeah. It's astonishing what humans are capable of, in terms of how we make things.
But looking
our
around
ingenuity.
This space, like you've got all the paints and everything here. Are you working with the artists to influence them what colours they're using? Because that's really shaping the artwork.
Sometimes. Sometimes it depends on the artist. Some people want exactly what they want, and we just print it and they leave with it and they do what they want with it. And that's great. And there's still a process there too, right? Of like figuring out what that is.
Yeah.
And how that's going to come to life.
Yeah.
From either a painting or a drawing or a digital or whatever. And again, that's what keeps it interesting, because like separate of all the gallery stuff or the sports stuff or like just production wise, just printing, again, it's night and day what we work on. We can do like a 25 color Peter and the Rain piece that's all diffusion dither, or we could do a 4-color print that's all spot colors and super vectorized and is totally the opposite product. But again, for us, it keeps it interesting, and it keeps us on our toes and learning new things about the process and pushing the boundaries of what we can print and how we can produce it, how quickly we can produce it, how well we can produce it, what we can do better. All those things.
I think people love seeing the behind the scenes of studios,
absolutely.
And being in here looking at everything. It's quite a world it's quite a mystery, I think, the print world for people outside of it. I mean, you can understand artists that work in paint and putting paint on a canvas.
Sure.
But the print world is really complex and
it can be
exciting as well.
It can be super complicated. Yeah. And obviously like really industrialized, or it can be really DIY.
Yeah.
And all of the in-betweens, and they're all still legitimately fun and interesting.
So to finish, what advice would you have for an artist that perhaps creates work similar to that you have here at All Star Press? They want to create a successful career. What would you say to them?
Figure out your taxes first. That's number one, is get a good bookkeeper. So I don't know. I think, it sounds super corny, but just believe in yourself and follow what it is that you think is important. Whatever that may be, whether it's something social, whether it's a character, or just something that excites you on a day-to-day basis and keeps you learning and keeps you meeting new people and pushing yourself in ways that interest you and foster. I think you have to foster your own like inner relationship, whatever that is, and figure out how to like make it a positive thing as best as possible.
Yes, I think that's true. And as you said, there's so much out there now. It can be overwhelming. And I think for artists, it's similar in that there's almost so many directions they can go in that they can lose their voice, or it's endless comparisons.
Right.
So you have to have faith in what you're producing.
And especially now with everything being so accessible, I think it is slightly harder and harder to come up with something that's original and come up with something that's not been done before. I think that's a constant struggle. What do you do that's new? What do you push that's not been said before or been done before? And it's really difficult because there's just so much content out there. I think that can be very overwhelming. It's to try and kind of not push that stuff aside and realize that, like, you know, the likes and the digital content, like, it matters, and it obviously builds your brand and it's going to get you clients here and there and whatever else. But inherently, you still got to do all the little bits and pieces in during the day that isn't on social media.
Yes, yeah. And
build those bridges and create relationships and make interesting things and foster the community you're in, whatever that community is, and just keep pushing for a better space.
Great. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Yeah,
it was great to be here.
It was great to have you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please follow All Star Press at All Star Press Chicago and the podcast at The Visible Artist Podcast. I hope you have a wonderful week in the studio, and I'll see you next Friday.